Juliane attends her graduation and her prom wearing a lovely patterned dress. It was apparently blue, but all the photos I could find were black and white. She wore her hair up, she had a date, just like a normal typical teenager. You're trying to book a flight for Christmas Eve though, and as you can imagine, the tickets are like gold dust. So Maria eventually gets the last 2 tickets she can get anywhere with Lufthansa Airlines. Hans was less than pleased about it because they'd had a terrible reputation with 2 crashes prior. One of them in '66 and the other one only a year before Juliane and her mother were due to take to the sky. There were no survivors in the first crash and only 1 survivor in the second, the co-pilot.
Oh no, Lanza. What planes were these?
Now I looked further into this and I did look into the aircraft that they flew on and it was pretty damn interesting. So I found out that these planes, the Lockheed L118A Electra, were built between 1957 and 1961. They made 170 in total. Incidentally, the plane crash that had happened the year before with Lufthansa had been the exact same model of plane Juliane and her mother were destined to board. I wanted to see if there was anything to that. The plane, if you Google it, looks like one of those planes from Catch Me If You Can. The version I saw was silver and navy and had short wings. It has 2 propeller engines on each wing, a bit like a bumblebee in that it has short wings but packs a punch in power. After a few crashes, they discovered that there was an engine mounting fault. The engine sat slightly at a weird angle on the mount, and this was identified as a potential reason for the crashes, so they did a design change. But when they did the design change, it was too expensive. No one wanted it and it was discontinued. But they kept the planes that had already been bought out there unchanged.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah. Now, naturally, if I'm halfway down the research rabbit hole, I'm going to go the whole way. I was so interested by this that I went diving a little further. Of those 170 planes that were made, 58 of them had been written off because of crashes and other incidents. 34%. 23 were legit crashes that happened between 1959 and 2003. That's 7% in heavy detailed crashes. I personally just find that mind-blowing.
Unbelievable.
Also, check out this gem of a fact find. The plane Amelia Earhart flew off in and poofed into thin air was a customised Lockheed Electra.
Aha. She was on her way to the mysterious Howland Island, apparently, when that happened, and that was it. She was gone. But that's another story.
So crazy. Anyway, back to the story, and just to recap. Hans is back in his shack in the middle of the jungle, and Juliane and her mother are on their way to the airport to board a flight out on Christmas Eve with Lufthansa Airlines, something Hans really isn't happy about. They get to the airport and the flight was delayed by 7 hours due to various different issues like a backlog of delayed flights and poor weather. Other flights had been cancelled and the airport was just chaos with long queues and tired, frustrated people.
Christmas Eve in an airport, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, eventually, and after a really long wait, their flight was called to board. She said that they felt really lucky and relieved to be boarding the plane. They felt like they were the lucky ones getting to be with their families in time for Christmas. Families with children finally going home for Christmas. They boarded at 11 a.m. Juliane was in the window seat, 19F, second to last row at the back of flight 508. Beside her was her mother and a businessman who was in the aisle seat and apparently fell asleep when they first took off. The next part I will read as an excerpt from Juliane's experience on the plane because only she can really give it justice.
Okay.
I also want to point out that this is the 70s and you dressed nicely for plane journeys. None of these shorts, flip-flops, semi-opaque shawls of your bikini top type deal. Juliane was wearing a nice white cotton dress to just above her knees, 2 white simple slip-on shoes, a wristwatch and a ring. It was only meant to be a 50 to 60 minute flight. They had just finished handing out trolley snacks in the cabin, which is about to become a Yahtzee barrel with all the snacks and luggage. Anyway, I'll start. My mother was anxious, but I was okay. I like flying. 10 minutes later, it was obvious that something was very wrong. There was heavy turbulence and the plane was jumping up and down. Parcels and luggage were falling from the lockers. There were gifts and flowers and Christmas cake flying around the cabin. When we saw lightning around the plane, I was scared. My mother and I held hands, but we were unable to speak. Other passengers began to cry and weep and scream. My mother very calmly said, "That is the end. It's all over." Those were the last words I ever heard from her.
Oh my God.
The plane jumped down and we went into a nosedive. It was pitch black and people were screaming, and then the deep roaring of the engines filled my head completely. Suddenly the noise dropped and I was outside the plane. I was in a free fall, strapped to my seat bench and hanging head over heels. The whispering of the wind was all I could hear. I felt completely alone. I could see the canopy of the jungle spinning towards me. Then I lost consciousness and remember nothing at all of the impact. Later I learned that the aircraft broke into pieces 2 miles, 3.2 kilometers if you will, above the ground. I woke the next day, Christmas Day, and under her seat, no longer strapped in, and looked up into the canopy, and my first thought was, I have survived an air crash. The crash had happened around 1:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve. I couldn't really feel anything. It was like being wrapped in cotton balls. With a lot of effort, I could only get onto my knees. Then everything turned black again. I couldn't see very well with one eye. It took half a day until I could get up and walk. I shouted out for my mother, but I only heard sounds of the jungle. I was completely alone. I searched a full day and then realized no one was there. I had broken my collarbone and had some deep cuts in my legs, but my injuries weren't serious. I realized later that I had ruptured a ligament in my knee, but I could walk. She now found herself in the middle of the jungle with minimal injuries. A missing shoe, and she'd lost her glasses. She was short-sighted, so she decided to use the foot with the shoe on to test the ground beneath her as she moved forwards. She could hear planes above her searching for the crash site, but the jungle was so dense that it had swallowed the plane, leaving virtually no trace of the crash, and she couldn't see through the trees.
That must have been terrifying. But her instincts are kicking in now by the sounds of it.
Well, in survivor mode, and while she was still at the crash site, she rummaged for food. She found a bag of hard sweets and a Christmas cake covered in mud and dirt. She picked up the cake and tried to eat it, but she said it was so dirty that she left it. In hindsight, she wished she'd had taken it with her. So now she's tapping her way through the jungle, knowledgeably, worried about the danger that lurked there. Snakes were her main concern, posing as dried leaves. Mosquitoes were another large concern, and the diseases that they could bring. And there were also piranhas, crocodiles, poisonous frogs, bugs, and leeches. She was searching around the crash site when she heard a faint trickling noise. It took her a moment to place the sound, but she followed it to a small creek, because as we discussed earlier, she knew that if she followed the water, she'd be more likely to hit a settlement of some sort.
Ah, it's all coming together.
Well, the weather was warm and humid during the day, but this is the rainforest, so it also lashed rain several times a day and night. At night, it was freezing cold, and she didn't have anything but this little dress and a single shoe. She couldn't sleep at night and described the rain as freezing bullets pelting her skin. The rain was so intense that none of the leaves could have provided any relief or shelter, and it just soaked everything. On the third day, whilst following the water, she came across a propeller engine in the middle of the creek. On the fourth day, she recognized the call of a king vulture and knew that bodies were close by. She found a bench with a woman and 2 men, 3 feet deep, head first in the ground. It was her second time seeing a dead body, but she'd been a small child when she saw her first and didn't really remember.
A lot of people, maybe even especially kids, would have gone into some kind of shock at this point.
Yeah, and she was terrified one of them was her mother, so she picked up a stick to check her feet and found the toenails were painted. Her mother never painted her toes. She felt relieved and then instantly felt guilty that she'd felt relief. Now she says that she knew logically it couldn't have been her mother because her mother was beside her, but she said she couldn't help it and she was just scared.
Naturally.
On the 5th day, she recognised another bird call. This time she recognised it as a hoatzin bird that liked large bodies of water, her mother's teachings. So she left her little creek to follow the call of this bird and bingo, it led her to a river.
Oh man, it's like she'd subconsciously been training for this her whole life.
I know, right? Juliane decides that she's going to get into this river and float her way down it.